You are about to find out that the most common bird on Earth was never supposed to exist. Not like this, not in your yard, not in your city, not on every continent on the planet. There are 33 billion chickens alive right now. 33 billion. That is 4 chickens for every single human being on Earth. And every single one of them traces back to one moment. One ancient human in a forest in Southeast Asia who reached into the dark and pulled out a wild bird. Not to eat it, not to farm it, to watch it fight. That decision, made by someone whose name we will never know, changed the entire planet. And it raises a question nobody really thinks to ask. How did ancient humans tame something that could simply fly away? Start with the oldest bird domestication story we know, the chicken. You have eaten chicken hundreds of times in your life. It has become so ordinary that it barely registers as an animal anymore. But the chicken was once a wild jungle fowl, Gallus gallus, living in the dense forests of Southeast Asia, skittish and fast and utterly uninterested in humans. Zoo archaeologist Joris Peters, whose work on early animal domestication has reshaped how scientists understand the Neolithic period, found evidence that chickens were first domesticated somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago in what is now Thailand and southern China. Not for meat, not for eggs, for fighting. The first domesticated chicken was a gladiator. Ancient communities prized the aggressive territorial behavior of the red jungle fowl male, and they caught them, kept them, bred them, and set them against each other. The eating came later. The eggs came later still. The thing you put in a sandwich is a descendant of a fighting bird that ancient humans kept as entertainment. This tells you something important about how domestication actually works. It does not begin with practicality. It begins with human fascination. Think about what it would have taken to catch a wild bird in the first place. You have no nets made of synthetic fiber. You have no traps machined from metal. You have woven grass, knotted sinew, sharpened wood, and patience. Catching a bird alive without killing it requires a specific kind of stillness that most modern humans have completely lost. You have to read the bird. You have to understand where it lands, what it eats, when it sleeps, what sounds make it freeze. Ancient hunters who caught birds lived inside the behavior of those animals in a way that no modern person does. Researcher Karel van Schaik, an evolutionary anthropologist at the University of Zurich, whose work examines the cognitive demands of early human-animal relationships, has argued that the domestication of animals was not simply an economic decision, it was a cognitive revolution. To domesticate an animal, you have to model its mind. You have to understand not just what it does, but why. You have to predict it. And the birds that were domesticated first were the ones that ancient humans understood most deeply. The pigeon is perhaps the most extraordinary example. Columba livia, the rock dove, was domesticated at least 5,000 years ago in the ancient Near East. Egyptian hieroglyphs show pigeons in human hands. Mesopotamian tablets record their use. But what made the pigeon domesticable was something specific about its biology. Pigeons have a magnetic sense. They can detect the Earth's magnetic field and use it to navigate across hundreds of kilometers with accuracy that still baffles scientists. Ancient humans noticed this. They did not understand it in any scientific sense, but they observed that a pigeon released far from home would always return. And they built an entire system of communication around that single behavioral fact. This is how domestication works at its most elegant. You do not force the animal to be something it is not. You find what it already does naturally, and you build a relationship around that thing. The pigeon wanted to return home, so you made its home wherever you were, and suddenly you had a messenger faster than any horse. But the most sophisticated bird domestication in the ancient world was not the pigeon. It was the falcon. Falconry is one of the oldest and most demanding relationships between humans and birds ever developed. The earliest evidence of falconry comes from the ancient Near East and Central Asia, where petroglyphs and carvings show humans with birds of prey on their arms at least 4,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Anthropologist Gunther Endruweit, who studied the cultural diffusion of falconry practices across Eurasia, documented how this practice spread from the steppes of Central Asia westward into Persia, Arabia, and eventually medieval Europe. each culture adapting it, but none fundamentally changing the core relationship. What makes falconry remarkable is that the bird is never truly domesticated in the biological sense. A falcon is not bred for human companionship. It does not depend on humans for survival. It could leave at any moment. The relationship works entirely through a process called imprinting and conditioning that ancient falconers discovered purely through observation and trial over generations. A young falcon, taken from the nest before it has fully learned to hunt, will bond to whatever creature raises it. If that creature is human, the bird treats that human as part of its world, not as an owner, not as a master, as something more like a hunting partner. Ancient falconers understood this without any concept of psychology or neuroscience. They simply noticed that birds taken young behave differently than birds taken old. They noticed that consistent feeding from the same hand created loyalty. They noticed that hunger, managed carefully, made the bird return. And they built an entire art form around these observations. The word used in historical Arabic falconry texts for the relationship between falcon and falconer is not ownership. It is more closely translated as conversation. The falconer reads the bird constantly. Its posture, its feather position, its eye brightness, the angle of its head, and responds. The bird reads the falconer just as carefully. This is not a human controlling an animal. It is two creatures who have learned to read each other across the boundary of species. Now consider what this required of ancient humans. No written manuals, no YouTube tutorials, no expert to call. Everything that the first falconers knew about birds was built from direct observation, passed from person to person, generation to generation, refined across centuries, until what began as one person watching a hawk hunt became a practice complex enough that Persian emperors devoted their lives to it. This is what makes the domestication of birds different from other animals. You cannot force a bird. A dog can be dominated through size and physical control. A horse can be broken through exhaustion. But a bird that does not want to cooperate simply flies away. Every ancient human who domesticated a bird had to earn it, had to build something that the bird chose to participate in. Which brings you to a question that is harder to answer than it looks. What did the birds get out of it? The answer, surprisingly, is quite a lot. Domesticated birds gained consistent food sources, protection from predators, and in many cases, dramatically expanded their geographic range. The chicken now lives on every continent except Antarctica. It is, by pure population count, the most successful bird species in the history of Earth. There are approximately 33 billion chickens alive right now. The wild jungle fowl that started this story is threatened. The domesticated version has inherited the planet. The pigeon has colonized every city on Earth, exploiting the same ledge-finding, grain-eating behaviors that made it useful to ancient humans in the first place. The birds that chose to stay near humans, or whose ancestors were chosen, did not lose. They multiplied beyond anything their wild relatives achieved. Ornithologist Daniel Haag-Wachenagel at the University of Basel, whose work on feral pigeon behavior documents how deeply urban environments have reshaped bird cognition, found that city pigeons show measurably different problem-solving abilities than their rural counterparts. 10,000 years of proximity to human intelligence has changed how these birds think. The relationship went both ways, in ways that neither species could have anticipated. And this is where the story arrives somewhere unexpected. You think of domestication as something humans did to animals. A conquest. A subjugation. Ancient humans captured wild creatures and bent them to human purposes. But that is not quite what the evidence shows. What the evidence shows is a negotiation, conducted without language, across thousands of years, between two species that found something useful in each other. The ancient human who first kept a jungle fowl was fascinated by its aggression. The jungle fowl that first stayed near humans found reliable grain. The human who first trained a falcon was drawn to its speed and power. The falcon that first returned to a human hand found consistent food without the full effort of hunting. Neither side planned this. Neither side understood what they were building. But generation after generation, the relationship deepened, specialized, and spread across the world until there was no human culture on Earth that did not have birds woven into it. Tonight, if a bird lands near you and you look at it, really look at it, You are looking at the product of one of the longest negotiations in human history. That bird is not wild in the way its ancestors were wild, and you are not separate from it in the way your ancestors were separate. Something changed between your species. It just took 10,000 years to name it.